just want to welcome everyone to our event, Partnerships and Impact, how the impact of your investment, understanding the impact of your investment. We're really looking forward to this. So this is a webinar, so I'm unable to see all of your faces, but I'm very grateful that you're all here. Yeah, I just want to take a moment and kind of introduce myself. My name is Nick Pensari. I'm with the United Way of Salt Lake. I've been with the organization for about a year now. I'm over leadership giving. So those are individuals that give over $1,000 a year to our organization. I like to think of this network as kind of the backbone of our individual support. You join a couple thousand other individuals every year to make our work possible. So I do just want to extend my sincerest thanks to you. Today, we've got two amazing speakers with us. Bill Crim is the CEO and president of United Way of Salt Lake, and Ahrens Terpstra is the vice president of Collective Impact Partnerships. Both individuals are key to making our organization run and function and doing the incredible work in the community that we do. So you'll hear from both of them. So just bear with me as we work through some of our technical difficulties this morning. I do appreciate that. I believe I'm going to hand it over to Bill and Amy. I'm going to share my screen with the presentation, and then Bill and Amy, if you want, as you wrap through a slide, just go ahead and let me know, and I can do that. So just give me 1 second.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you all. Thanks for joining us. As Nick said, you are the folks who make the work we do possible. And we believe the work that United Way does is essential in our community, but it's probably never been more so than it has been this year. And we just felt like it was important to connect with you all and let you know what's been happening and how your support and partnership has enabled so much good work to happen this year. Basically, United Way does two things. We help people in crisis, and then we try to solve the problems that create that crisis. And I'm going to take just a minute and talk about the general crisis work that we do through 211. And then I'm going to turn it over to Ahrens Terpstra, who will talk about our partnerships to actually solve these problems and how COVID-19 has impacted that work specifically. So we've been doing some crisis work within the long-term work of our Promise partnerships as well. But Nick, if you go to the next slide, which highlights our 211 program, I hope everybody knows about this. Sometimes I think 211 is one of the best kept secrets in the state, but 211 is a phone number like 911. It's also a team of people and a set of organizations and a statewide partnership. And its purpose is to connect people in crisis to the more than 10,000 services and programs that exist in Utah. You may have had this experience yourself at one time. I know I have in my family where you've needed some support and help and weren't sure where to turn. There is a massive amount of complexity in our state when it comes to like the services and programs that are available for any number of needs, whether that's finding emergency food assistance, support for housing, support for a particular medical need, et cetera, et cetera. 211 is the one place you can go to find all of that. And we have a team of trained people who can help folks navigate that kind of overwhelming system and do it simply and do it with compassion and do it with grace. We are also keenly aware that sometimes there is no service for people. And so someone who is in housing crisis may not have a service available, even though we can provide referrals.
Any interested?
The course itself might not be available.
Sure.
we might need to ask everyone to just double check that you're muted, just to avoid any background noise. So knowing that there isn't always a service for folks allows us to document when that's a problem. We take that information to policymakers and help them understand where there are resource gaps in the system. We also know that it really helps if we can help folks all the way through the process of knowing where to turn for help and then making sure they get that help. We call that closing the loop. So we try to provide that more and more personalized support to make sure that the help gets to where it's needed. And then I'll just mention that COVID, not surprisingly, has dramatically increased the need for this kind of help. And so, Nick, if you go to the next slide, it's just a graphical representation of the increase from 2019 to this year of calls and interactions and requests for help to 211. A graph like this does not do justice to the challenge that people face. So my guess is that many of us know families who have been impacted directly by COVID from a health standpoint, or who have been impacted economically. It's important to know how many thousands of Utahns have been impacted by this, and it's important to know that your donations and your support have helped many of those families and individuals connect with the resources that will help them navigate this challenge. I want to pause there. We are, I believe, going to leave time at the end for questions and dialogue. So be aware of that. But I want to now introduce Amy Ahrens Terpstra, who is our Vice President of Collective Impact Partnerships, and ask her to talk about the work that we do to actually solve these big complex problems over time.
Excellent. Thanks, Bill. Thank you all so much for being here. And just again, echoing Nick and Bill and my thanks for your support. As Bill mentioned, in addition to that sort of meeting immediate needs work, we also work really hard to sort of at the same time look ahead and try to solve complex problems. And the most complex problem among all really is how to ensure that children in our community, all children, can lead healthy, stable, and fulfilling lives as adults. Both, they can be stable now and they can be economically mobile as adults and be financially stable. And the fact of the matter is that things are structured in such a way where some children have what they need to be successful and others don't. Others are left behind. And the research shows that it really takes a system of supports from cradle to career to really right the wrongs in right the wrongs that low income and children of color experience. So our team at United Way of Salt Lake runs something called the Promise Partnership. And this is a group of partners and partnerships all working together to ensure that every kid has what they need to be ready for kindergarten, ready for reading by 3rd grade, eventually, if you travel up this roadmap here, graduates high school, and then really gets to the point where they're leading those healthy, happy, and stable lives. On the next slide, you'll see some information about a community where we've had partners and deep partnerships for a number of years. So this is South Salt Lake. We support community schools here. So you might be familiar with community schools. What that means is that we fund partners to bring their basic needs services like health clinics, food pantries, like winter coats for kids when it's cold out, vaccinations, access to rent assistance. We bring those things directly to the school because the school is a trusted place for families to receive those services. And then we put a coordinator in the school to make sure that all of those services are oriented in the right direction, the same direction, and they are getting to the kids that most need them. We also work with these schools to make sure that the students are showing up, that they're there in the seats, because that is obviously very important to learning. We also work with the schools to make sure that it's a welcoming place for their parents, that school staff are improving their practice. So as you can see from this chart, it's working. Short of a blip when the test changed there between 2016 and 2017, you can see that over the course of the last few years, reading proficiency has been steadily improving, and the gap between student groups is improving. So when COVID hit, I think you can go to the next slide, Nick. We really worked hard with those partners that I mentioned and with the schools that we work with in South Salt Lake and in other places to respond. So one thing we did was launch an initiative called Stay Safe, Stay Connected. And what we knew last spring when COVID hit is that up to half of students in some schools didn't connect to their classroom in the virtual environment. So that leads to tremendous concerns about academic slide, losing ground. So we really doubled down on that community schoolwork that I was just describing. We made sure that we helped those schools continue to get families the food, healthcare, glasses, all those things that are important preconditions to learning and just help families be more stable. And then we also connected the county mayor's office to school districts, and that resulted in $10 million in CARES Act funding going to schools to help ensure that they could start the school year safely and effectively. Then we worked really, really hard to fill technology gaps. What COVID revealed was that a real disparity between people who have computers, have enough computers in their house, have reliable internet, and those who don't. So we have distributed to date nearly 1,500 laptops to kids throughout our partner schools so that they can connect to their virtual classroom, or just as importantly, they can be equipped for actual 21st century learning, which just requires that digital connectivity and digital know-how. So this work is continuing. We know that students are really still suffering because of COVID. Families are still suffering. You might have seen a Salt Lake Tribune article a month or two ago that contains some data from some local school districts, and it's pretty alarming. About 14,000 Granite District students have received 1 or more F grades or incompletes, and that's up double, I believe, from the year before. 5% of Canyon School District distance learning students haven't logged on to the online platform. In Salt Lake, completed assignments are down from 82% last year to 65% now. So the work of this is really carrying through into this school year, and I am certain well beyond. So we've begun a next wave of Stay Safe, Stay Connected. And there's a couple different threads of it. The first is that we're working with 5 school districts to identify the students who are missing. There's just a lot of students who the schools are hearing from intermittently or not at all. So we're building an army of outreach workers to go out and find those students, to build relationships with them, and to try to figure out how to help them meet their needs that they and their family might have so that they can better connect to their classrooms. And then we just launched something called the Reimagine Education Innovation Design Challenge. It's a mouthful, but what it really is all about is helping schools design interventions and changes to what happens in the school building so that we can help altogether measurably improve academic outcomes and close disparity gaps. If there's anything that COVID has taught us, it's that we need innovations and interventions. And that we cannot go back to the status quo of how things were before COVID. Many students were left behind, many students were falling through the cracks before COVID, and COVID just helped shine a spotlight on it. So this design challenge is really hoping to surface some of the best innovations that we can, after working with a small handful of schools, spread to other schools based on what works. On the next slide, we're layering in work at a community level. So we don't just work with schools. We work with mayors, and we work with city councils, and we work with neighborhoods to, as Winston Churchill has said here on the slide, not let this crisis go to waste. So it's really been a horrifying crisis. There's been horrible and even deadly consequences, but there's also been, for many of us and for many people in leadership, a really serious moment of reflection and reckoning on how so many families could have fallen through those cracks. How could our society and community really let that happen? How can racism still be so prevalent here in 2021? So on the next slide, what we're really doing is seizing that moment, seizing that opportunity, the window of opportunity, and we're working with Promise communities to ensure that the cradle to career supports exist, and they exist robustly in their community, that every kid has access to preschool, every kid has the opportunity to go to a community school, that there's awesome out of school and after school opportunities where kids can be safe and continue their learning, that kids can have the opportunity to go to college, and that that is affordable for them. So we're working to build that out in our promise communities. And this is something we've done for years, when we're really doubling down on it. And we want to be identifying also at the same time strategies that can fundamentally fix the cracks that families have fallen through. So wouldn't it be awesome if we didn't need to have community schools because kids weren't going hungry, families could afford eyeglasses. So we're working to fix some of those underlying issues that create those cracks. So we want an inclusive recovery. And this is one, coming out of this pandemic, stronger and more equitable than we entered into it. So that's ultimately what we're working on, and what your amazing and generous support is really helping us and the hundreds of partners that we work with across the Promise Partnership to do. And I think Bill's gonna finish us up here with something that ties it all together.
Thanks, Amy. We left lots of time for questions, but I want to just share one last slide with folks that tries to put all of this into context. As United Way has evolved over the last decade, we've been told, and I would agree, that it's kind of hard to understand how everything fits together if you don't live in it every day. So this slide is intended to piece together or organize the pieces of our work into a charter, a structure, an architecture, and you can see on one side of your screen the 211 infrastructure, and hopefully read that the initiatives that are part of 211, the efforts to build partnerships to focus on very specific ways of addressing people's crisis needs. You also see there that we've just identified that this was a really tough year in terms of crisis. A lot of you and a lot of other folks made extra donations into a COVID emergency response fund. We were able to give grants to 67 organizations working to meet those crisis needs that we refer to. That's super important piece of our work. Then in the center of your screen, you'll see the Promise Partnership that Amy was describing, and the levels of work, whether it's working with schools, working with whole communities, and you'll see the list of communities that we work with, or working with systems across our whole region. And then you'll see how United Way itself connects to United Way worldwide and to other national networks like Strive Together. I think one important thing about this is that none of the work that United Way does is done alone. So when you think about what you're investing in as a donor or a partner, you're investing in a set of partnerships. You're investing in the infrastructure that makes those partnerships work, and you're investing in the partners, in the programs and services that, in the case of our Promise Partnerships, 46 specific organizations work with us on various parts of this. Some work on health outcomes, some work on education outcomes, some work on basic needs and housing supports, for example. So I had a legislator, as I was describing this to him, sort of the light bulb went on over his head. You could see he's like, oh, he said, I get this. It's a soup to nuts approach. It's an all-in approach to solving problems. And I think that's one message I'd want to leave with you. Many of you know this. You've been with us for a long time. But if it hasn't been super clear that what United Way is doing is trying to build the biggest, most effective team possible to solve the most complicated problems in our community, and you are part of that team. We're deeply grateful for that, and this is an attempt to try to give you some insight into the important work that you're supporting, but it's probably something we will want to do again, and we welcome your questions and suggestions for how we can help keep you connected to this. I'll stop there. I see there's at least one question in the chat. And for the questions, Nick, let's go back to the prior slide, which I like to leave up just as a way of reminding people what our mantra is. It is about partnership, and it's about doing things that haven't been done before by doing them together.
Thank you, Bill and Amy. I really appreciate that. As you can see, our work is it's layered and a bit complex, and there's a lot of moving pieces to it. So I just want to encourage all of you that have your questions, go ahead and submit them in the chat. I'll be going through those, and looks like we've got 2 messages right now. So
do that, I can pose this first question, which I don't think everyone can see. So the question is, do we know if there are any bills on the Hill addressing evictions and/or housing crisis, specifically addressing the law firms that evict those folks with 3 days notice and add-on fees and other costs as recently reported in the Trib? And would United Way of Salt Lake lobby or be involved in this issue for our clients?
So the last question I'll answer first and say that yes, we would be involved in this. In fact, it's one of the issues that the Promise Partnership has been working on to address financial stability. I don't know the current status of that legislation, but we have worked over the last 12 to 18 months to try to make a change to the eviction process that would give people more notice and that would provide a little bit more protection. The story in the Tribune, I think, illustrates what a serious problem this is, how complicated the politics are, but it's definitely something we're working on. To the question of just affordable housing in general, this is the #1 need. When we look at 211 data, it's the #1 crisis need. Affordable housing is always the top need in every part of the state. And so there will be legislation this year to try to put more money into affordable housing and to a statewide eviction mediation program. We'll be working on that. If you haven't already, you can go to our website and you can sign up for our legislative bill tracker and our action alerts, and you can be connected to that. Every week you can get a status update on the set of bills that we're working on, and also be invited to interact with your legislators and help us.
And that's actually a good part of an answer to Billy Bennett's question here, which is what opportunities do we as donors have to get more involved? What Bill mentioned about signing up for the advocacy alerts is a huge one. So definitely do that. And then there's just myriad other ways. 2 that come to mind for me most immediately. The project that I mentioned, the Stay Safe, Stay Connected work to re-engage missing students. We're building out an approach right now with school districts, and I will bet you we are going to need an army of volunteers who are willing to connect with students and to be like a mentor and even a tutor for students. So if you are interested in that, I would love it if you would reach out to me. Nick can put my email in the chat. And then relatedly, we are working, we have worked for a number of years with some amazing business leaders and volunteers to find really effective tutoring approaches for math and reading in the younger grades. And we are at a point now where we have data that shows that kids who are behind can advance up to 2 grades with a dedicated tutor and the help of a really cool piece of technology called iMentor. And we have our sights set on spreading that strategy to more schools and to ultimately scaling that across any school that would be willing in our region. So that is another area where we need volunteers, and we're not talking one-off volunteers here. We're talking people who can be kind of reliable and show up and develop a relationship with a 3rd grader. I promise they're adorable, and 3rd grade math is not that hard. So those are 2 that come to mind for me. And Bill, maybe you would talk a little bit about sort of some of our leadership opportunities too around the PPRC.
Yeah. So I'm going to combine that question with a question that is, what worked in South Salt Lake? And and what are the partnerships or efforts that changed results, and then what do we need to do to replicate that in other areas. So connecting with kids is absolutely transformative and needed, and we hope you'll all do that in the way that Amy just described. And what works also is leadership. The model that we use for these partnerships is one called collective impact, but what it really is a commitment to cross-sector partnership. That the idea that people from the business community and the private sector sitting down with people from the nonprofit community, from local government and state government, from our education system, and sharing accountability for results. That's the magic of this. It's not just random activity. It's not just more services. It is a structured and accountable way of working together. And so throughout this whole infrastructure, Nick, if you go back one slide, there are leadership opportunities where individuals, from any walk of life, can sit down with folks who, they might be subject matter experts in a particular part of the work, but the conversation is about, well, how do we do it all better? How do we bring all of our expertise, all of our knowledge, all of our resources to solving this problem? So those leadership opportunities exist at the kind of regional level. You can see a set of initiatives under the red word networks. They exist in communities. So if you're connected to one of these communities, there is likely a group of people working on these issues together. And what makes South Salt Lake unique is that they have been doing this for the longest amount of time, with the most commitment and alignment, and frankly the most backbone infrastructure from United Way and from the city of South Salt Lake to support it. So if you can imagine, a city where virtually every adult and every organization who does anything related to kids and families is working together. That's what's working in South Salt Lake, and that doesn't happen naturally. Actually, that's not something that happens in the wild. That has to be created. That's the work of United Way, is to create that environment where all of the adults, all of the organizations who care about kids in a particular place are working together and using kind of data and continuous improvement practice to make things better. And then the last piece of this question is, what do we need to replicate that in other areas? We have lots of willing people. So we have willing superintendents and willing mayors, and it's being replicated in other places. But what we've learned is having adequate backbone infrastructure is key. So there has to be somebody who wakes up every day and thinks, okay, it's my job to build this partnership. And then we do need resources to help scale the things that are working, to help improve the things that are kind of working but need to be strengthened or modified a little bit. So it's not just about resources. It's about attitude and leadership and willingness. It's about skilled backbone or partnership development, and then it's about expansion of what's working.
Go ahead and keep those questions coming. Bill and Amy, we've got another question here of what are the biggest challenges or barriers to this approach to community change?
They are myriad. It's challenge. So like I mentioned, these are massively complex problems that we're trying to solve. And if they were easy, somebody would have solved them already. So, there's just a complexity and a long time horizon. This is, somebody said yesterday, generational work. This isn't going to be something that in 5 years we can all, pat ourselves on the back and walk away. We're in this for the long haul. And the challenge inherent in that is attention span and long-term commitment of partners, of donors like yourselves, everyone wants the quick fix, and there's no quick fix. There's no silver bullet to this, which leads to another challenge, which is in order to solve complex social problems, you need robust and interrelated strategies, interventions, and fixes. And those are difficult to conceive of, difficult to move forward, difficult to get sustainable funding for. So there's lots packed into doing this work and doing it in partnership, which is yet another challenge, which sometimes I talk about the work that my team does as herding cats, which I say very lovingly. But that is in reference to the fact that, when you get any group of people together, everyone has their own agenda. And our role is to help them set a common agenda and to turn everybody to move and to row in the same direction. And because humans are humans, that's just naturally difficult work. Bill, what would you add?
I might not add anything about the challenge. I think you've described it really well, the challenges that you've described really well. What I would add is about the opportunity that Utah presents. This work is being done around the country, and there are awesome places around the country making great progress. I feel lucky that I'm doing this work in Utah. And the opportunity I see is that while the same forces of complexity and patience and kind of siloed activity, those exist everywhere. My observation is that Utah and the Salt Lake region are places where those barriers get tackled a little bit better than other places, where there's a little bit more connection to people. There's a little more social capital. There's a little more sense of collaboration. So in some places, we have colleagues around the country where these barriers seem bigger. And I don't want to make it sound easy, but I do want to say Utah is an awesome place, and with unique, committed people. And again, you are part of that team that creates the opportunity to make really awesome progress. And not to be humble bragging about this, but because of that, here in Utah, this partnership is nationally recognized. There are investors and people in the United Way network, in the broader place-based anti-poverty network and social change infrastructure in the country, who look to Salt Lake because of the progress that's being made.
One of the things that I kind of want to go back to that I thought was interesting is those innovation awards. And I know that we've had some difficulty connecting students through this online learning environment. Are you able to go a little bit more into detail on some of those recipients and the innovative things that they're trying to keep their students connected?
Yeah, definitely. So there's sort of two prongs to the innovation work that we're doing. So the first actually happened this summer, which is what you're referencing, Nick. We awarded, I think 5 to 6 schools. We gave them an innovation award. We solicited applications from schools across the valley. I think we had something like 40 to 50 schools apply. They told us about the awesome work that they were doing at that point. This was like July and August, to create a successful start to the school year, not just for COVID, but how they were using this opportunity to think differently about education. So some of the winning ideas were things like this. One school, maybe 2, are working to what we call detrack students. So there's a practice, some of you might remember this from your school days, where some students are pushed into gifted and talented programs and others are not. What the research very clearly shows is that that practice is particularly harmful to low-income students and students of color, and actually doesn't that much help the students in the gifted and talented programs. So some of these schools are actually experimenting with what is it like just to put every ninth grader in AP English. Let's treat everybody as a capable and amazing learner and see what happens. And the initial data on that is pretty amazing. It's showing that the kids who might have been in the AP program under the old model are doing just as well. And the kids who are in it who wouldn't have been under the old model are also succeeding at rates that are higher than anticipated. So we have a few schools doing that. There's some really good work going on around family engagement, making schools more welcoming places for families so that families can be more involved and feel like they are invited to be more involved in their kids' education. There's some cool work going on around math and teaching math and leadership in schools. So what we're really doing with this second wave of the innovation challenge is to put our own team members in with a school team and to walk through a process where they're asking themselves deep questions about what the academic data and the disparities are showing, and walk through a process to design an intervention that is very specifically aimed at moving the needle on a specific disparity. So we don't know yet what those innovations are going to be because the design process is happening right now, but there's a really intentional push to make sure that teachers are involved, that students and young people are involved, and that parents are involved in that process. So we're pretty jazzed about it. In a couple of months, we'll have some cool prototypes to share out with you. And then this time next year, really have some data about what worked and what didn't, and information about how we're spreading and scaling those innovations.
Thank you. Another question we have from Eric Rumpel is, how have the social impact bonds that were assisted by UWSL turned out? Do you feel this financing model will be viable for the longer term?
That's a great question. The short answer to how they've turned out is amazing. And I would say both the actual social impact bond project has been successful, meaning each year it has met its target metrics for success for kids. Those target metrics mean that the investment is being repaid and the model has worked, both for kids and for the overall financing. For those that aren't familiar with the social impact bond, it's a way of using private investment to fund an intervention that will ultimately, solve a problem and avoid public sector costs down the road. So in this case, the investment was for preschool, and literally hundreds of kids have been, thousands have been in the program and benefited. Hundreds have avoided unnecessary remedial services and have saved the state millions of dollars, and it's worked exactly as it was intended. The other benefit, the other way that it's worked, is it has changed the conversation about preschool in Utah. In 2012, there was no state investment in preschool, and it was pretty hard to have a conversation at the legislature about the importance of early childhood education. Today, the state has, or over time, I should say, the state has invested, I think, over $60 million in preschool, not all in the social impact bond. So it's made additional investments over that period in high quality preschool. And if you were to go and talk to legislative leaders today, they wouldn't raise an eyebrow if you said early childhood education. They would say, yes, we need to do more. And I think that's one of the biggest effects. The question about is this financing model viable for the long run? Looking nationally, there have been, we were the second social impact bond in the country in 2013, the first for anything related to education. And there have been many more done, but not as many as I would have thought. And so there are barriers to doing this that have slowed the field down, but it is viable. It has been done. Salt Lake County government has 2 active pay for success projects or social impact bonds going right now. We've spent the last year in development of another one. It's possible that we will have another project going, this one focused on out of school time services and job training for parents of kids together. We call that a 2-generation approach. So I think it's not always the right financing mechanism, but I think it's viable. There are barriers to doing it at scale that we continue to work through.
Another question that we've got is, you hear the phrase social determinants of health brought up in the conversation, and how it's not just about having individuals be healthy or et cetera. Can you kind of go in more in depth on kind of what United Way is doing with social determinants of health and how that'll go?
Yeah,
About this one,
Amy,
Bill?
I'll start and just say that, to put a little bit finer point on the definition of that, it's the fact that much of our health status is determined by things outside of the healthcare system. So it's our environment, it's education levels, it's jobs, it's resources, and the absence of those things can negatively impact people's health, the absence of these social determinants. So obviously the work that we're doing is addressing many of those social determinants. Everything you've heard to this point in the call is addressing social determinants of health, education, economic mobility, etc. However, there is kind of new and focused attention on better collaborative efforts to address the social determinants of health. And so one of the things that United Way is doing through both 211 and our Promise partnerships is pulling together health systems and working with them to better link health providers with the social service delivery system that address some of those crisis needs. So if someone doesn't have adequate food, and that becomes clear when they visit the doctor or the emergency room, there is now a much more direct and formal link to 211 and then the resources in the community that can help address that need. Intermountain Healthcare and the University of Utah have both been awesome pioneers of this work, but I would say that's true also of other health systems. And what's cool and sort of an example of the point I made earlier is that in Utah, all of the healthcare systems are working on this together.
If there's any more questions, go ahead and get those submitted. I don't see any more right now, but if you do think of a question after the meeting ends, go ahead and send me an email. My contact information will be on the last slide, so I'll pull that up in a moment. Send me an email and we'll get those answers for you. We've got about 10 minutes left. Bill and Amy, do you guys have any closing thoughts, any final things that you want to share with us? And I think maybe we can end a couple of minutes early.
Yeah, I just once more expressing my gratitude for your support and involvement in this work. As the chart in front of you demonstrates, it's layered, it's tiered, it's complex, it's wide, and it's deep. And I know it can be hard to wrap your arms around, but that's sort of by design. We're trying to attack these issues from many different sides, because that's really what it's going to take to make a dent in the challenges and to move the needle and make our community a more thriving and inclusive and equitable space. So thank you for being here today, and thank you for your ongoing support of our work.
I'll echo that thanks, and I think I'm not speaking out of turn to say it's our intent to do more of these, and so we look forward to reconnecting with you in this way. And again, I'd invite you to visit our website, sign up for the advocacy alerts, the bill tracker, find out who your legislator is if you haven't done that already. Encourage you to connect with Nick if you'd like to talk more about ways that you can volunteer. Nick can sort of be the air traffic controller and connect you to either our volunteer team or our partnership building team. And we just we're deeply grateful for your connection to this, your support of it, and your willingness to be part of this growing and highly effective team trying to solve Utah's most complex challenges.
So I just want to say thank you so much to Bill and Amy for joining us. You know, it's nice to have you all a part of this call. Again, I'm very grateful to work for United Way of Salt Lake. It's an incredible organization. I'm glad that we were able to share this with you. None of this work would be possible without you, our supporters. Y'all are what keeps this this machine going. So I just want to say thank you so much. And again, if you've got any more questions, I will be happy to send those along. If you've got any questions, concerns, comments, anything like that, we can do that. And then I will hang out on the call for a couple of more minutes after everyone departs. So if you've got anything else, I'm here to answer any questions you may have. So enjoy your Thursday. It's almost the weekend. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nick.